Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. We're going to start off here with a quick kind of month-to-date look at temperature and precipitation because we're about to finish one month and start a new one. And the first map we're looking at here shows you the average temperature ranks by climate district for the month of November. Now, when you look at it, it seems pretty clear that the western United States favored more colder days, and the eastern, especially along the East Coast, favored some warmer conditions. But it's a bit nuanced because remember, the front half of the month was very, very warm for the East Coast, and then all of that cold air that continues to build across the western United States and Canadian prairie, it got let out. And that was the big cold snap we saw that started in the middle of the month and lasted almost up until just very recently. So this particular map it's a bit misleading. Let me show you what I mean. I went in here and pulled off the data for Raleigh, North Carolina, just as an example. And again, you see right here, these are all the very warm days we saw for the beginning of the month. And then, of course, the first of multiple cold snaps. One of these was actually the same cold snap that delivered the tremendous amount of lake effect snow we saw more than a week ago. We've just recently kind of popped back up to above normal temperatures. So while we're here, why don't we flip this over and look at year-to-date precipitation? Because in Raleigh, we've kind of hung around right near our climatological average. In fact, we're just a little bit wetter than normal on the entire year. But if you look back over the last month, okay, we've actually been wetter in the interior of North Carolina and up to the Appalachian Mountains, drier, slightly so along the coast. Now, the Eastern Corn Belt, this map is going to change quite a bit when the new rainfall data kind of gets pulled in here, because we did have some decent rains that did move across the Eastern Corn Belt. But the part of the Western Corn Belt and the hard red winter wheat belt right in through here just remains extremely dry. And that's been very problematic for the crops that are grown there, like specifically the winter wheat. But this is what the whole United States looks like, just month in review. Now, this past weekend, we saw a deep low that set over parts of Texas right here, putting some snow back in western Texas, just slowly and painfully work its way toward New England. And it did bring through decent precipitation, but again, you notice how it was a bit drier in the southeast part of the state versus the central and western part of the state. And there was kind of a streak right in through here, very heavy rainfall that stretched from Alabama all the way through central North Carolina. Now, just thinking about this, I wanted to put a bit more context to recent precipitation. And the first map I want to show you goes back to November the 1st and looks at soil moisture values according to NASA. And what we're going to do is we're going to just flip forward to this map, which is the 28th. And we're looking for change. So that's the beginning of the month, and here we are at the end. And some of the recent rainfall did come through and wipe out some of the dry concerns we were having here. And also because of those recent rains, we've also seen a bit of a change in the drought monitor. But before I get to that, I just want to point out that still some of the major arteries that feed into the Mississippi River are quite dry. I'm talking about the Missouri River, parts of the northern Mississippi, and the Ohio River Valley, even though there was better rains here as of late. This is why we continue to see the river showing up quite low, still a few feet below its low stage at this point. But we did get some changes in the drought monitor. The newest one was released just the day before Thanksgiving. And this is what it looks like. So we just have a quick look at what changed on the map. Here we go. This is just the 1 week drought monitor change. No changes across North Carolina. But over the last month, we have had a few pockets in through here that continue to show some degradation. But I think that the most recent precipitation we've seen, the stuff that came through this weekend, plus what we're going to expect to see over the next 10 to 30 days, is going to just keep beating back any sort of late fall or early winter drought development across North Carolina. All right. So, big picture. This is how the next 10 days are shaping up right now for the United States. These colors represent wetter than normal conditions, and these are representing drier. Now, you look across North Carolina, and you do see a bit on the drier side of things. But I'll tell you, we have multiple chances of precipitation coming through because the pattern is very, very active. And I want to talk to you about what that means, and I'll also just mention that the likelihood of a full, accurate verification of the model predictions at this point is going to be low because of how active things are. So let's grab a look at it here. We're going to start by staring down at the North Pole. And I'm going to show you the pattern that we're going to see throughout this week because it's going to favor something you're pretty familiar with. And that was when we looked throughout the month of November at the cross-polar ridging that was happening in Alaska and also here across Scandinavia. And what this has really done is every time this occurs, we tend to get a secondary feature where there's a trough over Siberia that extends all the way here into the western United States. Now, at times, this also tends to produce a broader ridge feature over Florida. So the pattern, follow this last arrow, likes to do something like that. Okay, and that particular setup just delivers systems out of the Gulf of Alaska into the northwest, and then they eject somewhere from the plains to the Great Lakes. So as I play this forward, going out here through this week and beyond, what do we see? The same thing. There's the cross-polar ridging. Here's the trough that cuts the other direction, and you get this sense of some sort of southeastern ridge, somewhere here between there and Texas. So that's out to Friday. As we go on forward into the weekend, and then out there beyond that, what we're going to have to watch for is the evolution of this ridge. Do you notice that out there by next Monday, December the 5th, we start to see a bigger ridge feature building into Greenland? And that larger ridge feature here is going to allow the colder air that keeps getting built up in the Canadian prairie in the west to start to get dislodged and move over toward the east. So we have mild days that are coming up, punctuated by only very brief shots at colder air. But as we get into the month of December, there's a few things I'm watching, and one of them is this big ridge building into Greenland. Now, as I go forward with this, what you're going to see is this blocking pattern called the negative phase of the North Atlantic Oscillation digs a trough in here, a big ridge over Greenland, and dives back down to actually this high over low setup, something like this. That highly amplified pattern, should we continue to see it throughout winter, is one that delivers more frequent shots at colder air for us and also increases the risk of big East Coast cyclones. So we're going to have to watch that carefully. Now, when we started to see the atmosphere do this, I'm starting to look for what's the cause, what initiated this. I'm going to share with you what I'm finding here. The MJO is part of it. It has made its way back through phases 6 and 7 and popped out again today in phase 8. It's expected to crash back into null phase and then come back out some point in phase 5, 6, and probably 7 again. We can see that in the behavior of the trade winds, which continue to surge. This is still a part of our strong La Nina we anticipated to last through November and most of December. It's after the start of the new year that I expect this to start to fall off. But as it stands, I'm just going to draw for you where I think the MJO is going to be. I think today it's starting off here. It's going to move back over probably into phase 6 and then finish back into phase 7 or 8. If you just kind of follow that line, it sits initially on phase 8, moves to here over phase 6, and then back over to phase 8 again. And what's important is to understand that that transition, 8 back to 6, 7, and 8, will likely give us better chances of seeing a pattern that does something like this. Notice the ridging that tends to happen here. Now, this particular case, we have another ridge over Scandinavia, so it's not a perfect match, but our jet stream tends to come across the Pacific, run up into this ridge, and then dive into the northwest. We saw that, and you got to get this sense of some ridging over the southeast, and then at times that cold air gets let out into New England. So that's very common in phase 8 in December. What if we go back to phase 7? Well, there's that southeastern ridge once again. The jet stream comes off and it breaks up into two pieces over the Pacific here, but this is one where there tends to be more cross-polar ridging, and that lets that cold air get moved farther to the east. It just sets things up to be active. It's this southeast ridge, though, and its permanence that I'm concerned about, because right now it's actually a major part of the setup of the severe weather we're going to see later this week. Now, that severe weather is primarily going to be in the lower Mississippi River Valley, but we've got stronger storms coming over us on Wednesday. See it right here? There's the ridge. See the flow coming up into Alaska and then diving into the northwest? That's our current setup. Now, if I flip over from here, which this again is mid-level winds, so the mid-level winds are screaming across like this. If I take you down in the atmosphere, now you can see they're coming out of the Gulf of Mexico and doing that. And even down closer near the surface, now they're coming almost out of the south or southeast. So this is the surface wind. We have the low-level winds doing that, the mid-level winds doing something like this, and the jet stream level winds coming in like that. So can you see how each of these arrows kind of crisscrosses over the lower Mississippi River Valley? That is the location where, starting tomorrow, we're going to be looking out for the risk of severe storms. There's two lows. There's one here and there's one here that are forming. And they're both going to be moving across the country. So the severe storms here are going to move toward us on Wednesday, and we better go and have a quick look at that. Because the Storm Prediction Center has issued a moderate risk, and they have very carefully worded their risk as hail, straight line wind damage, and also the risk of long-tracked or substantially strong tornadoes here. By the time this goes from Tuesday into Wednesday, now you see that the storm risk moves over toward us. So let's go have a detailed look at this by going to the high-res NAM model. All right, this is this morning about 8 o'clock when I'm recording this. If we just play this forward on Monday, getting out here into Monday evening, and into Tuesday morning, we got high pressure over us, so we're going to avoid the rainfall. All the action's taking place in Kansas. Now, to the north of that low, there's going to be snow that spreads through parts of the plains and Midwest. But watch here, Tuesday midday, getting into Tuesday afternoon and evening. The model is picking up on the risk of discrete supercell development, and that is, of course, being aided by the strong wind shear and decent amount of CAPE, that's instability in the atmosphere for this time of year. We still hang on to, drier conditions through the day on Tuesday. Now, as we work our way into Tuesday night, that's when some of the rain could start to move its way toward the Appalachian Mountains. And going forward into Wednesday morning, Wednesday early morning, let's get out there to Wednesday mid-morning, and beyond. Notice that it's going to be Wednesday morning that the main front passes over us, increasing the risk of those strong to severe storms, some of which could produce some very, very heavy rainfall. So that's why we still have on the day 3 outlook, we're going to be keeping an eye on when that front passes through and how much it could do in terms of delivering some strong to severe storms. Now you look over over the next 7 days, and you get a map that shows you total accumulated precipitation from the WPC. This is NOAA's official forecast. And notice how they got the heavier rains in the western side of the state versus the eastern. Again, that's been very typical of systems as of late, but I'm just going to tell you, this forecast, again, very nuanced because of the thunderstorm development. You could get very heavy rain over here in the eastern side of the state as well. It is important to note that over the Tennessee Valley and Ohio Valley, we're going to be putting down decent amounts of moisture, better than 1.5 inches of rainfall. And that will get into the Mississippi and help revive some of the water levels as we go forward. Notice who's missed. It's the central United States. It's the plains where the hard-to winter wheat is already in drought. But better moisture returning to California, which is desperately needed given their reservoir situation. Now, I'm going to do something kind of fun for you here. We're going to compare the other 2 models I like to use, the GFS and the European. So the GFS is on the left. That's a U.S. model. And on the right, I have the European model, which is, of course, in Europe. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to watch them both move at the same time. So here's the first system. There it is. That's noon Tuesday, Tuesday evening, Tuesday overnight into Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon and evening. So you see it, that's when we're going to watch this on Wednesday, the front coming through. Much colder air coming in behind this and some stronger winds. But high pressure filters in by the time we get into Thursday, and that's when our attention goes back to the West Coast for the next system. Now in both models, the European and the GFS, they have the timing about exactly the same. So what we see here is that by Friday, getting into Saturday, high pressure sits over us. But the GFS, being a more progressive model, takes the next system over the Great Lakes faster than the European. And what you'll notice here is that it's going to bring rain over parts of North Carolina on Saturday much sooner than the European does. The European brings it on Saturday night into Sunday morning. So just a little difference here in the timing of the next front. From there, you're going to watch the atmosphere reset again. And here comes the next system by next Monday, getting into Tuesday. And that system's going to gather in the Midwestern part of the United States, just like the previous systems, and it's going to roll east, delivering rainfall to the Carolinas. So we have the system on this Wednesday, the system that's later this week into the weekend, and then the one midweek next week. That's 3 systems to be watching very carefully. How much are we expecting in terms of total accumulated precipitation? Let's just go have a look at it from the European model here. So there's the first push on Wednesday. See it? And the model's picking up on, generally speaking, half inch to an inch of total accumulated precip. But I want to remind you, these storms could produce much more locally heavier amounts than what the European model is resolving. Remember, we're then drier toward the end of the week as high pressure comes in, but we're watching that late weekend system. Here it is, that Saturday into Sunday, and that one pushes through. And then the third system next Tuesday, Wednesday pushes through. So the heaviest rains are on the western side of the Appalachian Mountains, but we could be looking at over the next 10 days, halfway decent chance of picking up almost an inch of rainfall. In fact, here's the probability over the next 10 days of getting an inch. You see that in the middle part of the state, it's 50 to 60%. So there's decent moisture coming with the heaviest rains here in the Tennessee Valley. Note again how dry the plains are continuing to stay, which is impacting that harder donor wheat. Now, as we saw, there's going to be a big ridge next week that builds over Greenland. And as that builds over Greenland, the flow is going to come around this like that. That's going to bring in some colder air, and it's also going to keep this region wetter than normal. And that means that even though you're like, wait a minute, I see a little drier in the southeast, I think you can make this a bit larger as to the better chances going into week 2 of seeing some wetter weather as that ridge builds over Alaska. But we'll be Greenland. What we'll be watching for is any potential development in the second week of December for some coastal systems, maybe one that comes off of the Appalachian Mountains or just a true coastal system running up the East Coast. We'll watch for that very carefully. On the temperature side of this discussion, watch this. Here's Monday's highs. Today's getting into Tuesday and Wednesday. There's the warm-up we talked about. That's out ahead of this next system. But then the big cold front comes through by Thursday, knocking our temperatures back about 20 to 25 degrees. But then we expect a rebound. So Friday into Saturday and Sunday, the temperatures start to warm back up again as the deeper troughs anchor themselves by the end of this next 7 days here. But what did we see? This moves out. And as it moves out, what we end up getting is this. So this is a 5-day sliding window of temperatures. Most of the colder air, is going to it's going to stay really anchored over the Canadian prairie through the first week of December. We'll get shots of cooler air, but nothing sustained. When the ridge starts to build over Greenland, right there in the first week of December, that's when the cold air gets let out. So you see it coming out of the Canadian prairie, moving through the Midwest, such that by the end of the first week of December and beyond, that colder air has moved its way all the way to the eastern side of the United States. Now, in addition to this, all of the snowpack over the northern hemisphere, all of the ability for the jet stream to go very high amplitude and produce those cross-polar ridges has already begun to kind of weaken the polar vortex. It's already kind of split up into two pieces. There's this anticyclonically spinning piece here and a cyclonically spinning piece there. It's not one big unified donut just spinning over the North Pole. We've seen that looking at some of the data that unlike a year ago where the polar vortex was very strong until March, it's already started off on the weaker side this year. And this is just a way by which I keep track of the polar vortex. When it's weakened, that's when we worry about colder air. All right. Now, from here, let's play this out a little bit longer term. We do not see strong model forecast biases, wetter or drier for us through the month of December. And that's important to understand because that means the pattern will likely continue to do what it's been doing. Stay open, stay moving, where the blocking features are not limiting the return of systems to the United States. They're really just impacting the temperature pattern. And that temperature pattern, take a look here. This is the 30-day outlook from December 7th to January 7th. Just continues to advertise reservoirs of deep cold building in the western Canadian prairie in the western United States and getting let out at times across the U.S. So let's continue to watch for the possibility of that going forward. Now, as we finish this up, I got to give you some important updates on South America because I believe there's a story that's brewing there. And the first thing we're going to look at here is the fact that we've got very strong trade winds still going across the Pacific. So La Nina is still very much here. It is showing signs of fading, and we've talked a lot about that. But the effect of this over the last month has really actually been to start to increase drought concerns across some of Brazil's major growing areas. I'm talking about southwest Mato Grosso do Sul, and over into parts of Paraná, where you see things have been quite dry. I can look at it a couple of different ways. For example, let's go to soybeans. Where we grow soybeans in Mato Grosso, can you see how there's been a deficit that's been building over time here, where they're now about 3 to 4 inches below normal throughout the month? Now, it still means they've gotten plenty of precipitation, but we don't want to see this continue if we're concerned about drought developing there. What's also been interesting is that the NDVI values in Mato Grosso have been dropping. They were near average. They're now down here at the end of November below normal. A year ago, very, very high. And it's more than just that. We can go to Mato Grosso do Sul and see the same thing. The NDVI values were above average. They've now come back to average. Now, the longer-term drought stresses in Argentina continue. So, for example, if we go to Cordoba, they're still well below average. Same thing for Buenos Aires and also for Santa Fe. These are some important growing areas here. And as we look out at the forecast going forward, we do see dry risks in parts of Mato Grosso do Sul. But the driest conditions seem to be anchored around Paraguay, all the way down into Argentina. And this is an area that continues to struggle with significant drought issues. In addition to that, the temperatures are expected to be much above average, meaning evaporation rates are going to be quite high down here in Argentina going forward with a lack of precipitation. So the drought issues in Argentina are going to continue to build. Now, the one thing that makes me not yet overly concerned about how dry this is that they had a fast plant. It's been a little drier as of late, but not. We still had decent moisture in most places, but the new long-range forecast suggests better rains in central and eastern Brazil. And if that verifies, that's going to continue to just help this first crop out. The question is, does this verify, or do we continue a drier trend for Mato Grosso? And does Argentina continue to show up drier in the long-range models as well? Because by the time this particular forecast ends in early January, they will be harvesting soybeans already in northern Brazil. So I'm going to leave it off there. Had a lot to cover today, but hopefully this has got you kind of thinking about the bigger picture, things I'm concerned about going forward. I'll wrap it up here and hope you all have a good week and talk to you next week. Thanks.